Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Empowering Clinical Trial Sites to Deliver Better Clinical Data Faster. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation is a roundtable discussion with our panelists and also includes a Q&A session with them. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout this presentation by using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Clinica, who developed the content for this presentation. Clinica is transforming healthcare through innovative cloud technology that simplifies running clinical trials. Proven in over 10,000 studies worldwide, the Clinica platform is trusted by leading biopharmaceutical companies, contract research organizations, academic institutions, and government agencies. Clinica is used across a wide spectrum of clinical research, including drug, device, and diagnostic trials, global health studies involving 200,000 patients, adaptive platform trials, and clinical trials for some of the first gene therapies to be approved for market. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to your moderator for today's roundtable discussion, and he is Ben Bauman, co-founder, and there he is, and Chief Operating Officer at Clinica. Ben has been working in the clinical research field for 16 years. He co-founded Clinica with colleague Cal Collins to make it easier for study teams to carry out high-quality clinical research using modern technology. As Clinica's Chief Operating Officer, Ben has helped develop the company into a leading provider of cloud-based solutions that help automate and accelerate clinical trials while delivering an industry-leading user experience. Ben holds a BA with honors from Harvard College. Now, it's my pleasure to pass over the mic to Ben to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. So, Ben, all to you.
Thank you, Sonia. Appreciate it. Great to be here today. And we have some very distinguished panelists joining us who have experience across many diverse types of studies, therapeutic areas, studies of different sizes, and across different geographies. They represent three of the most prominent and active academic research organizations leading clinical research today. So we have with us Yama Mujadidi, who is the clinical trials IT and development lead at the Oxford Vaccine Group. And his group has led a lot of high-profile research recently, including the development of COVID therapies, which are widely used today. We have Amanda Bravery, who is the head of ICT at the Imperial Clinical Trials Unit at the Imperial College of London. And her group at Imperial College is a truly sought-after partner to industry that provides a full spectrum of support to trial sponsors. And then last but not least, we have Miriam Garza, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Biomedical Informatics at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. And Miriam and her group has consistently had leadership roles in standards development and professional development organizations supporting clinical research. So I will let each person briefly say a few more words about themselves and their background before we get into the questions. Yama, shall we start with you?
Thank you, Ben, and hello everyone. My name is Yama. Glad to be here. I'm Clinical Trial IT and Development Lead at Oxford University, Oxford Vaccine Group, and have been, by profession, I'm a software engineer and have over 10 years of experience in software engineering, mostly focused on data science and clinical trials. I have been involved in multinational trials as well as single-site trials. I'm glad to be here with you.
Great. Amanda?
Hi, welcome everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Amanda Bravery, as Ben has said, at Imperial College London, working in the Imperial Clinical Trials Unit. We're a UKCRC registered research-led collaborative clinical trials unit, working college-wide, supporting clinical trials in a variety of phases and therapeutic areas. My particular background started in data management, and I've worked for CRO, a pharma company, and I've been at Imperial College for the last 11 years. Thank you.
And Miriam?
Thanks, Ben. Hello, everyone. So, as Ben mentioned, I work at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences in the Department of Biomedical Informatics, and currently I work to support a pediatric clinical trials network, and we conduct start up and conduct trials across the US. We have about 30 sites that we work with, but I've also worked with single site research protocols as well as multi-site, national, international. Also, as Ben mentioned, in the standards development space, I've had 10 years experience in academia and the clinical research space, and my own personal research is in trying to identify ways to use technology to streamline the way that we acquire and process our data for clinical trials, but also how that can translate to clinical practice and public health initiatives as well. So this talk is extremely fitting, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Great, well, thank you very much. We've really got a great group of folks to be talking about empowering sites because they possess a breadth, depth, and really a purview that spans perspectives typical of sponsors, CROs, and sites themselves. So I think we're going to kick it off here today with a poll. Sonia, would you like to pull up the poll?
Certainly, thank you so much, Ben. And we have our first poll question. So audience members, this is done in real time, so your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated. And the question we have for you is, how is the role of your sites changing? So please go ahead.
So yeah, it's, sites have not, over the last few years, sites have not been operating normally due to COVID. Many have been at reduced capacity. Number of them have been closed. At the same time, we've really seen a rise and a lot of buzz around this concept of decentralized clinical trials, which creates a sense that sites perhaps are less essential, and that technology and remote services may be replacing sites. But at the same time, sites are still a tried and true channel for accessing patients and necessary expertise. So we'd love to hear your thoughts with regards to the sites you work with and see if we can sample our audience's perspective here.
Okay, I'm now going to close the polls as it looks like the majority of our members have cast their votes. And I'll leave a few more seconds for those of you who have not cast your vote. If you can go ahead and just choose from the 3 options below. Perfect. All right, perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. I'm now going to close the polls, and let's take a look at the results. Okay, so here are the results. Ben, we have 48% of the audience saying my sites are more essential than ever. Then another 45% are saying my sites are about the same. And then we have just 7% that are saying sites have a less important role in my research. So thank you, everyone, for participating in poll question number 1. Ben, what are your thoughts on the results?
Yeah, I think it's interesting and probably as expected. Sites are clearly still key partners in clinical research today, even if their roles may be changing. And I think what we'd like to do over the next 50 minutes or so is really break this down to look at how we can strengthen and maximize these partnerships throughout a background landscape that is changing. And so let's go to the next slide that has our first question for our panelists on it. And to introduce this question, I'll point out something we probably all know, which is on average it takes 10 to 15 years to develop and bring an approved drug to market. There's a ton that goes into this on the clinical side. You have to run numerous studies, and for each study you have to get the intention of qualified investigators. You have to design protocols, get them approved by various stakeholders. You have to put in place and implement any number of technology systems. Then you have to recruit the patients, all while managing budgets, investigational product supply, and maintain compliance with any number of regulators. So there's a ton that goes into it. But at the end of the day, it's really about getting the data and helping patients. And sites have a lot to do to make this happen. So to forge better partnerships with sites, let's first try to identify some of the challenges they face. And so we'll pose this question to our panelists. What are your site's most common pain points? And I think, Amanda, would you like to kick us off here?
Yeah, really happy to. I mean, I think this is probably a really interesting one that that a lot of sites, like site staff, I mean, at the moment we've seen with the COVID pandemic that they're busier than ever. They've got a lot going on, and they're trying to see more patients, and there's a lot of pressures you've just explained. I think the key for a lot of staff is just not having enough time, probably not having enough people to do what they need to do, but wanting to support the research, support the people that they need to help with their medical needs. And I can see it's a real frustration. I think with research, it can be challenging to get patients into sites and to get them seen in a productive way. So I think, again, there's lots of challenges that are going on. I don't know if Yama or Mariam, you'd like to add some extra points there.
I can add.
Yes,
oh,
go on, Mariam.
Okay. So I think Ben listed off, we prompted this question, a ton of activities that sites have to do to get started. And I think the biggest things that we've seen, at least in the networks that I've worked with, have been that contracting and IRB component, making sure that we're getting in all the local context, and that just takes a lot of time. There's a lot of moving parts and can slow things down for a site to actually be able to get up and running and start recruiting. And then there's two major technology-driven items that I think we could potentially resolve using various tools. One of them is the EConsent process, and how to figure out a way to have a centralized process, at least for our multi-site studies, that sites can adopt, and it would be more streamlined. They're not having to figure out how to do these things on their own. And then also they're struggling with the manual, time-consuming data collection component, the chart abstraction and the data entry and all of that QC that comes along with it. And I think that we could potentially figure out ways to streamline that process.
I know, Mariam, you're involved in some efforts there, industry consortia there, to try to kick that ball forward. Yama, would you like to add from your perspective?
Yes, yes, Ben. So just to add few other points, I think as my other colleagues has mentioned, the biggest problem here is to make the research easy. We all agree that we love to be in research, but one of the challenges, especially dealing with clinical trials, being a doctor and then going through so many regulatory requirements, going through so many tools in every single trial. Sometimes, unfortunately, if you're working across different trials, sometimes you end up with different tools, which means technology itself can make it very difficult. You have to learn different tools, and just overall how we can make things easy, so then the overall recruitment can be quick, easy. But on top of it, how we can use some of the technologies that can make things easy for us, but also is easy to understand and work with it. And also streamlining those technologies going forward, that if we are getting involved into different trials through different sponsors, how we could use the same tools if possible to make things easy, so then we don't have to go through the user manual, and then we don't have to go through tons of SOPs and regulatory requirements to meet those standards. I think these things are doable, but the question is how we can come together and work more effectively to achieve that.
Yeah, thank you. And sites are worth pointing out, are certainly heterogeneous. I mean, it's, you know, if you're running a trial with 10 sites, you may have 10 sets of pain points, but there are definitely some common themes that that we hear over and over again. A lot of it has to do with, you know, burden of data entry and getting that data cleaned in a timely fashion from sites. That's a problem that specifically eClinical is working on, and I know Miriam is as well. There's so CRCs, your clinical research coordinator, your day-to-day is really the day-to-day person that's responsible for getting the data together at most sites. And in a recent survey from the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, there was a question that indicated 61% of research coordinators were completely or somewhat burned out. And a majority of respondents said that their turnover in this group was higher after the pandemic. So COVID put a lot of additional stress on the system. As we move to the next question, just to further substantiate the kind of you know, burnout, there was another survey done by the American Medical Association of more than 20,000 U.S. healthcare workers, and almost exactly half reported at least one symptom of burnout, while 43% said they suffered from work overload. Technology exists to purportedly help with things like this. Sonia, if we can have the next question, I'd like to see if we can have the panelists talk about from their own experience how technology has helped reduce the workload on their site staff. Miriam, perhaps you'd like to take a crack at this one?
Sure. So we are working with various groups, eClinical also being one of them, to identify ways to streamline the data collection process specifically, among other pain points. And so one of the ways is to leverage standards to allow for a standardized approach to move the data directly from the source, the EHR in this case, to the electronic data capture system, or the EDC. And by doing so, you have the potential to reduce a lot of that cognitive load that the individual coordinators face when they are continuously having to find the various places within the EHR that this data might live. And if you've seen one EHR, and the data you know, can be in all sorts of different places, even within the institution. The way that a department might chart something or a provider might chart something may not necessarily be the same way that a second provider would chart something. So being able to utilize a standard such as the HL7 FHIR standard to essentially grab that data electronically and pipe it over automatically to the EDC reduces the amount of time that they have to spend searching for it. And then I would say that using mHealth or eHealth technologies does also reduce, and I think we'll get to this when we talk about the decentralized trials, but reduces that burden that sometimes gets added when you're having to do site visits in person, and it could potentially reduce the amount of time it takes to actually recruit the numbers that you need to recruit at your site. So there's just a couple of things that can be done with technology to improve the workload for the site staff.
Just to add on top of that, so basically what we have done is, if I could go through some of the experience we have had previously, so starting from participant recruitment, so just involving trials from that end, and then going more further into other part where we start to implement pre-screening, for example, which was very, very helpful for our other trials, but especially with COVID trials. When we start running COVID trials, as you can imagine, suddenly as soon as you go publicly to say we are running a trial in COVID, and the media covers it, millions of people comes to take part in the trial. So one way for us was to reduce the time instead of our medical staff sitting and then calling every participant to see whether they are eligible or not. We start introducing a new technology, which we call it as a pre-screening, where a participant goes through inclusion, exclusion. If they are happy with the study, they go through the screening, and then only if they are eligible, then we collect their personal information. That saved a lot of time for us. And then as my colleague previously mentioned, we did introduce EConsent as well, where at some stage we used EConsent to make the process easy as well. And then the most important thing that helped us a lot and helped site a lot was we introduced real-time data entry. So instead of using paper source, we are then in some cases, especially when we were doing phase 1 trial, where if you're using paper source, you have to be super careful, which means in most cases you need to do double data entry. In order to eliminate that, we decided to do direct data entry. So we provided tools that users can go and do direct data entry, and then equally developing another tool that can enable us to do real-time data cleaning. So instead of waiting for months and months before you can go and then clean your data, we try to do data cleaning on real time. And also, and then when it comes to engagement with the participant, again, we use some tools which enable us to go ahead and then introduce a new technology which can help us to get the real data from the participant in the real time. A good example will be that Open Clinical Support is the participant module which enables you to go and collect the diary or data from the participant on real time. So previously, and some other trials, when this technology was not available, people used to wait for weeks when they see the participant again, or used to call them to ask about their symptoms. While now with this technology available, participant can submit their data straight away, which means you as a physician and your clinical team can easily get access to that data. One, it increases the safety. Two, it helps you to analyze your data, and also helps you to understand whether the participant is recording the data correctly or not. So it has been outstanding achievement for us, because it saves us a lot of time when it comes to reporting and when it comes to especially some of the submission. Because by that time we had everything actually ready, and there was less burden on the sites, and instead of waiting for months and then suddenly sending thousands of queries, it was doing in the real time, which means they were able to go and solve those queries as we go now.
Yeah, one follow-up for you was the pre-screening approach that you mentioned. How was that conducted? Was that done, with site sort of involvement, or was it done centrally, electronically?
So basically, obviously, as a sponsor, because the trials across our site. So in UK, the COVID trial that we ran, which is Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So that in UK we had 15 sites, and then obviously as a sponsor, we all the sites had the same questionnaire for the pre-screening. However, all the data was managed centrally, but then every site had access to their own data. So as soon on the daily basis, they were able to go and extract the eligible participant information and then contact them and then follow them from there.
Great. Yeah, I know there's some very creative approaches that were applied to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine trial, where you really compressed timelines in a major way. And there's some good resources and videos that help to illustrate some of those techniques on the website, including the fact that your group anticipated a pandemic to begin with. So you were ready with the picks and shovels when the event happened to go right out of the starting block. Now, Amanda, I know you've done some work as well on the eConsent side. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how it may have impacted the workload at your sites.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, we've got several studies that are using the Participate module through Open Clinica, and it's facilitating great data collection. It makes it more accessible in this particular case. It's working with parents of premature born babies, and we can capture the information and also facilitate the capturing of data 2 years down the line when the children are 2 years old. So it's certainly come into its own in that context. What we found, and you know, thinking through the first question about pain points at sites, if you imagine very busy research staff you know, at sites, they're dealing with so much that's going on. Obviously, if they're working on multiple research studies, they could be exposed to lots of different technological solutions. So our focus is very much to make it as simple for them as possible, because if you overcomplicate it, you can build resistance and therefore reluctance for them to feel confident to log in, enter the data, and leverage all of those benefits that we hope that they would get from the technology. So we try to do that by very much involving as many of the study team that we can during the database design and the ECRF creation, and ensure that we don't overcomplicate it in terms of the design, and make it appropriate for the protocol and fit for purpose, but real for the patients that they're going to be seeing on site. Because from our experience, technology really does have a place to help reduce the workload, but it's only as good as of the people that are using it and embracing it. And of course, the training and ensuring that staff are really confident how they're using it and that they've got the support there. So if there is a problem, whether they've forgotten the password, whether it's you know, not sure how to navigate around, it's really key that we provide that. So I just wanted to add those in, because I think there's some real peripheral things that are really crucial for ensuring that technology can actually really benefit site staff.
Yeah, and there can be such thing as too much tech, and the key there is really, as you pointed out, Amanda, I think focusing on making it easy, allowing it to really dovetail, allowing the technology to dovetail into the site's normal day-to-day workflows, because as you pointed out, most sites will have multiple sponsors that all bring their own technology to the party, and you know, imposing another system to learn is a burden, even though that technology itself for that trial can deliver theoretically productivity. You have to think about the combination of all these different things. So at Clinica, we really focus on trying to make the technology work, you know, as much as possible behind the scenes. So the site really doesn't have to think about it, and they can, you know, add data, you know, from their EHR into the EDC system and things like that. So we've been hearing a lot about technologies and approaches that are decentralizing clinical research, leveraging existing health data, health records data, electronic informed consent, device agnostic, BYOD, ECOA, sorry for throwing all those acronyms in there, but letting patients contribute data directly and in true anytime, anywhere fashion is another way of saying that. Mobile healthcare services and telehealth are certainly having an increasing presence in research, remote patient monitoring, and then wearables and apps. So if we can go to our next poll, this poll really gets at the concept of decentralized trials. And Sonia, if you want to run the poll, I can maybe provide a little bit of commentary as you go.
No problem. So the question that we have are you running DCTs? Remember, I'm going to give you 40 seconds to complete this simple poll question. I'm going to pass it over to Ben now to go through your options to choose from. And then after he's finished, we'll close the polls and take a look at the results. So go ahead, Ben.
Okay, so are you running DCTs? This could be a difficult question for a lot of people to answer. And let's start by kind of let me give you a definition of what a decentralized trial is. And this isn't my definition. The FDA has actually promulgated this definition that says a DCT are trials that are executed through telemedicine and mobile local healthcare providers utilizing processes and technologies that differ from the traditional clinical trial model. So that's a really broad definition. And you know, so there's a lot of room for interpretation there. Now, the answers you have to choose from here are: we've done a fully decentralized trial, we've done one or more hybrid trials, perhaps where you've used certain parts of the trial or maybe certain sites were disintermediated in some productive way. We've piloted certain approaches and technologies, or you haven't yet scratched the surface. Or finally, what is a DCT? And if you answer that question, we know you're not paying attention because I just told you what it is. So maybe we can see what the responses have come in.
Okay, let's take a look at the results. Okay, here they are. We got, oh, look at that.
So I think there are 14% of people who probably need to go grab a cup of coffee, perhaps. But I respect the decision. I respect that response. Nonetheless, what is a DCT? I think that's a valid question. It's sort of in the eye of the beholder, the answer to that question, I think. So 7% of our respondents have claim to have done a fully decentralized trial, which is I think pretty impressive. 30% have done one or more hybrid trials, and that's a lot. That reflects like a lot that we're seeing here. Running DCTs is not an all or nothing proposition. You don't have to decentralize every aspect of the trial or every process at every site in the trial. You can really pick and choose and evolve in that direction. And that hopefully can help the folks who haven't yet scratched the surface come up with a plan for benefiting from some of the, quote, decentralization technologies and approaches that are proving productive out there. So let's go to the next question, which is, are DCTs the answer to your overtaxed sites? So kind of an open question, perhaps a bit of a loaded question, but have you decentralized some of your own studies in certain ways? And perhaps Yama, you'd like to take a stab at that?
Yes, absolutely. I would be on the category where I will say we have somehow decentralized, but still very far, because the type of trials we run obviously sometimes require physical visits. So basically, decentralized trials are very useful with the simpler studies at the moment where technology can support. A good example will be, let's say, if we are running a hypertension trial, treatment trial, then obviously you can use Apple Watch, which can give us the blood pressure recording on a daily basis, or what often we require, which means then we do not require participant or the patient to come for a physical visit, which saves us a lot of time, cost, and also it will help with the recruitment, because participant will say, you know what, I can just sit on my bed and then send the data instead of me going for a walk to the trial center. However, if you're running, or if we are running a cancer trial where we need to take size of the tumor, obviously that requires a physical examination, or perhaps in some cases require a diagnostic imaging tool, which means in that case it will be very, very difficult to use the technology through decentralized to make that possible. Now, obviously, we run a lot of vaccine trials, and in vaccine trials we use a lot of technology to reduce the burden of participant coming to us. A good example is obviously the using e-diary, which means participant can submit us data as they go along, which means we do not have to ask them to go and visit us. Now, with the COVID, for the past 2 years, we have seen that decentralization is becoming more popular, where it's possible, just because what COVID has showed us that before, if sites were reacting, or if we were reacting with the idea of decentralization, now when the COVID happened, obviously because of the safety of the participant as well as the safety of the staff, everyone, I'm sure, tried to reduce the number of visits and try to do as much as possible distance visit or doing decentralized, applying decentralized process, which means then conducting the visits through the phone and using the technology, video calls through phone, through using some of the diaries, for example, and asking participants to actually get involved with that as much as possible. And itself also increase engagement with the participant, which makes things interesting as a participant. If you know that you have that engagement on real time, that makes it really interesting, which means if someone has been in your trial once, then seeing that level of engagement, then obviously they will come back and will be happy to take part in other trials with you as well.
So, Miriam, what has to happen for this to become more viable across research, perhaps in general or even with regards to your own trials?
I think that one of the big things is to make sure that the infrastructure is in place at the institution or institutions that are going to be going that decentralized route. A lot of times we've had issues with, some of our other sites just due to regulatory or security constraints can't do certain things. And so we have to come up with backup methods or hybrid approaches so that we can accommodate their needs that are, no fault of their own. It's just the way that the institution is governed. But then also the sites that are willing and able to do the decentralized or implement the different technologies or approaches and allow them to do it. I think too, some of the challenges may also come about in the form of technical literacy and making sure that your staff and the patient population or the participants have that technical literacy so that they know how to use these tools, and it's not something that is super foreign to them or uncomfortable, because then you may lose out on a very important population if they are just not comfortable with utilizing their mobile devices, or they can't afford certain things, or don't have consistent broadband or internet connections or data plans. So those are things that we've had to think about as we've tried to move in this direction. And I think it's just dependent on the sites you work with and the studies that you're conducting. As Yama mentioned, some of them are just require that in person to conduct various tests. And maybe in the future, we figure out a way to reduce that for things that require imaging or, certain dosing, medication dosing or vaccination dosing that doesn't require them to actually be in person. But I think it's going to be a ways away and site and study dependent.
Yeah, and DCTs, achieving the promised land of DCT is clearly an evolutionary process. It's not all or nothing. Amanda, is there anything you might like to add in from your own experience with regards to decentralization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think some really good points made by both Yama and Mariam there. I think from my perspective, it's balancing, obviously the intention of DCTs is to reduce and eliminate the need for patients to come to sites. So it really does offer the opportunity to meet unmet needs potentially that you can't normally get through traditional clinical trial design. I think the main focus should be, though, ensuring that there's no data issues, because you can end up with missing data, which any statistician will tell you is a problem. So it's around the quality of data, and also the sort of regulatory aspect, because in terms of eConsent, you need to ensure that it's genuinely that person that's, if you're going down that route, that is actually given the consent. It's not somebody else who's doing it on behalf of that. And there's some MHRA guidance around that. I think there's definitely the benefit there. I think there's possibly some evidence to suggest that costs can be higher with DCTs, but you're just shifting the cost from perhaps one area to another. So it depends what your aim is in terms of trying to run a DCT. And a follow-on related to what you were saying, Mariam. Sorry, Ben, do you want to?
No, go ahead.
In terms of ensuring that you've still got that medical staff support for the patients, because that's absolutely crucial. So you don't want them to feel removed from that access to the need and support, especially depending on what the area is.
Yeah. So DCTs really represent a spectrum, and it's something that sponsors and other organizations running trials can get into really in a stepwise fashion. You might start by doing, BYOD pro surveys and diaries and things like that from patients on their own devices. You might then add automated EHR data polls, then EConsent, then telemedicine, and everyone will have their own pathway, and it may not be necessary for all participants and for all site participants and all patient participants to adopt the exact same approach, process, or technology in a given study. So if we can go to the next question here. While DCT approaches and technologies are becoming more widely employed, we still need to solve for today while we plan for tomorrow. So now let's break this down to look at the beginning goal of getting studies launched and the end goal of getting them completed. What are some ways you work with sites to get studies launched faster and completed faster? And I'd like to just open this up to anybody who wants to jump in.
I'm happy to kick off with this, if that's okay. Possibly repeating some of the things I may have touched on earlier, but for us, it's engaging with the site teams, working closely with them through the database development. It's absolutely crucial, as perhaps even as the protocol's being finalised and submitted for approvals, it's important you're thinking about the database design, thinking about some of the logistics going on in clinic, whether it's got randomisation or not, and really thinking about who needs access to this data, whether it's unblinded roles, all of these things. And it's crucial to be having those detailed conversations during that setup phase. And the more you engage the CI, the PI, and any research staff, the better quality output you're likely to get. We utilise a lot of standards in terms of, we've got standard ECRFs, we've got a library of forms that we collate so that we can have familiar forms so that our users are familiar with similar design forms. Obviously, they can modify them slightly, but the idea is familiarity, because then they'll breed confidence in terms of accessing the forms, filling it in, which results in ultimately good quality data. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and data, getting quality data, getting clean data is often a bottleneck in terms of being able to wrap up a trial. Can anybody speak to any strategies they've used to facilitate this, perhaps to help reduce queries?
Yeah, so just to add on that, very agree with Amanda. So usually try to, as a sponsor, I would suggest try to work with the sites that you have worked before, just because they do understand your process, and you understand them, which means the communication is easy. And then engaging sites as early as possible. But then more importantly, enforcing reusability and automation in the right way. And one thing which we have learned is actually providing sites with the right tool. So providing the right tool at the right time to the right people is very helpful. Not necessarily bringing more technology, not necessarily bringing a lot of tools can help, or a lot of automation can help, which is one of the biggest topic at the moment. But bringing the tool which is required. So coming to your question, Ben, so what we have done is with the COVID trial, based on our previous experience, so once we start running the COVID trial, obviously at Oxford AstraZeneca, we start with phase 1, quickly went to phase 2, but then also we went to other continents. We start running a trial in Brazil, in South Africa, and other places, just because we wanted to get the data, and especially we went to Brazil and a few other places where we knew that the cases were very high, and we wanted to get the result as soon as possible. Now, what we did was we tried to use our CRFs or some of the practice that we have learned from previous trial, from phase 1 trial, bring it into some improvement, listen to the sites, what they don't like actually, and listening to them, and then bringing those changes into phase 2. So when we run phase 1, then when the time comes that we have to run phase 2 or phase 3, we did make sure to listen to our sites when it comes to designing the database and try to implement some good practice. For example, what we did was we tried to follow the traffic lights. So we tried to build our CRF in the way that it talks, it tells a story to the person who's doing the data entry. And then telling them that, look, there is a traffic lights, which means if you're seeing a banner with a green, read it, it's helpful. But if you're seeing something red, you have to be absolutely careful with it, because that will increase the number of queries, and actually this is something that will come up. And also overall design of the CRF. A simple theory that I have is garbage in, garbage out. So if we can build the CRF, if you can build the CRF or your database in the way that you can stop people from adding the wrong data in the first place, that will definitely help you in the long term when it comes to data cleaning.
Yeah, whenever you're talking, I'm just going to say, whenever you're talking about manual data entry, which is the majority of trials today still, form design is so important. That's really the heartbeat of, of your selection process. It really has, that form experience has an outsized impact on a whole bunch of stuff that happens downstream in terms of reviewing that data, verifying it, cleaning it, there's, just because you built a form on paper in a PDF or what have you that somebody could fill out with a pen, doesn't mean you should replicate that exact same thing electronically. You really need to rethink the user experience in the context of all of the tools that are afforded to you via modern electronic systems today around dynamic logic, real-time checks, calculations, computations, being able to reuse data so you don't have to ask the same questions over, strategically ordering the way in which you ask questions so you may not have to ask all the questions, for instance. And then of course, whenever you can pre-populate these forms with existing data, say from medical record systems, that sort of takes it to a whole nother level.
I did want to add one thing that worked for us with one of our trials was to develop abstraction guidelines. This is obviously specifically for data collection from some other source. We were pulling from the EHR, but we had the PIs and co-Is of the trial actually sit down and say, where does this data get collected in the EHR? And if it's in multiple places, what's the priority order? If they can find it here, that's the gold standard. If they can't, then here's plan B, C, D, E. And that really helped our study coordinators with figuring out where to go in the first place and streamline that process for them a little bit. But then we also implemented continuous QC, so we would check every certain number of cases that they input. We would run a QC on a percentage of those cases, sit down with them, talk through any discrepancies, identify the true errors based on comparison to the EHR, and then corrected them, had them get corrected right on the spot. And then they could use that information to go back to any other records that may have queries already generated for them or that may not and would have in the future. So it helped to, I think Yama had mentioned in one of his examples that tackling the QC during or as early as possible rather than waiting until the end and you have 1,000 queries. So I think that isn't another way to help speed up the process.
Yeah, that means you can lock faster. So rather than waiting to lock everything at the end, you can lock, for example, one event at a time, which will put you in a more advantageous position. I think, Miriam, you also mentioned, or I believe that you also deployed a technique to empower sites to analyze data as they go along rather than waiting until the end. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so they are able to, we would run a comparison against the data that they entered. We actually did double data entry for a few of the records. So a certain percentage of the records, we had somebody else go in and from that site and re-enter it. So still a somewhat manual approach at the moment, working on a way to automate that piece. But and then in the behind the scenes, we were running algorithms to compare, to run a discrepancy, and then we would sit with them and check their EHR to verify what the correct answer was, so to speak. And it didn't require that us at the coordinating center had access to the EHR, just that the coordinator did. So for those sites that have privacy concerns, we were able to mitigate that by not actually needing to have the access ourselves. But it allowed them to see where their mistakes were, or where, they may have accidentally put in, a different number, transposed numbers or letters, or maybe they had looked incorrectly, and allowed for us to retrain them as well on the abstraction guidelines as necessary as these things came up. And then with another trial, we are working on using eClinical's Insight tool to generate reports and dashboards that we can provide to our site managers, and they can see those things in real time or close to real time, and then be able to contact the sites as early as they identify these issues, and then address those as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. So just a quick time check, about 8 minutes left. We have one more question I'd like to pose to our panelists, and then we also have some questions from the audience I'd like to try to address as well. So just jumping ahead here, want to just see if we can briefly tackle this question of how do you actually get a site to do something different? They're not your employees, they're independent. There are many of them, and they need to function in concert in the sense of the protocol. Can anybody offer some strategies and tactics that have helped you better engage sites from a change management perspective and perhaps adopt new technology?
I would say listen to what and try to acknowledge if as a sponsor, especially if you have had a mistake, just listen to what sites are saying, or even if things are very good from my side, from as a lead data manager and developer, even if something I think is working really good in my site as a sponsor, and if other sites is complaining, it's always worth to listening to them, and then going back and try to talk with them to see either to solve the problem for them, even if it's not a problem for other sites, or find a solution which can work for both of them. And that will build the trust, which means then that engagement and the trust, they will feel that actually this is something that I'm a part of it, and then that really helps. And also what we have done is with some of our trials, with everything being in the cloud at the moment, we try to move some of our stuff into Teams, creating different channels, giving sites access to that channel. So instead of sending, for example, some of the requirement documents, amendments, and other stuff separately to different sites, we do put it into Teams, which means they can have real-time access, and also conducting a lot of trials on Teams, recording, and then putting that together, which means again that helps with more engagement and involving a lot of sites to communicate with each other as well. Not only communicate as a sponsor, but sites together. When you have multiple sites talking together, there is more interaction and engagement between sites as well as between sponsors.
Okay, well, thank you, Yama, and thank you, Miriam and Amanda, for sharing some of your detailed experience and helping to make this an interesting conversation. We uncovered some good nuggets here that I think our audience should be able to take back and put to use in their own research. Before we turn to a couple of questions, I think there's one last poll. Sonia?
Okay, thank you. I'll launch that poll right now. It's a quick poll we're going to do right now. The question is, would you like to speak with one of the webinar panelists to learn more? So just go ahead and click yes or no. Give you a few seconds to complete this poll, and then we're going to get right into the Q&A portion of the webinar.
In about 45 minutes, we've tried to cover some pretty big topics. So if you'd like to speak further with any of our panelists or myself, feel free to let us know, and answering this poll is one way to do that. We've also included two downloadable resources for you in the handouts section of the GoToMeeting interface. One is called Your Blueprint for Decentralized Clinical Trials, and there's a data sheet on eClinical Unite, which is eClinical's groundbreaking EHR integrator that can really move the needle in a big way to make sites more productive and better partners. So why don't we now go to some questions from the audience. So let's see, just starting with the first question here. Sites have rapidly adopted their own technology solutions. When sponsors fail to understand, they end up duplicating, or worse, much of that functionality, and they disrupt existing site workflows. Sponsors need to spend time to understand what the site of 2022 actually looks like. It is not the site of 2015 or 2019 even. I don't see a question in there, but any additional thoughts that some people may want to add briefly?
I agree. I think there's.
Go ahead, Amanda.
I agree. You know that the world is changing. We know that anyway. But I think it's this balance, and we've touched on this at several points. It's about engaging with them. You know, sponsors need to ensure that they're not just putting a believed solution in place without listening to the site staff to know what's going on. The last thing you want to do is put in a tech solution that just undoes all the good work that they do, because that's not going to result in what you want. Over to you, Mariam.
Yeah, I think you and Yama in the previous question had touched on this really well, and just empowering your sites to be able to communicate with you and let you know. Some may be more timid than others. Some will be very open with you, but making sure you're getting perspectives from all of your sites, because they are going to be different. And sometimes when we don't have a solution in place, but we know of sites that do, we investigate that option and see if that's something that we can standardize across our network and figure out a way to implement it. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't, but I think showing your sites that you do value them and that you do think that they are able to contribute in more than just collecting the data will foster a stronger relationship between you and your sites.
Great, thank you. So here's a question that says, I have a site that refuses to use multi-factor authentication. Any pointers?
I would just go and talk and ask why they don't like it. One, and two, to be honest, I would then probably go and try to talk with them and tell them it's absolutely a pain to use to authentication, but it will be more painful if someone hack your account. Trust me on that. So it's just a conversation that you need to have with your sites to see why they are having a problem. And a good example again will be there are different way of authentication. Maybe you're using phone authentication and they would like to have an email double authentication, or there are different ways, and see whether that's something that could make things easy for them, as well as you achieving what you want to achieve.
We've actually had this situation. I think sometimes there are certain rules in hospitals that don't allow site staff to have their phones on them, to keep infections down to a minimum. So I think what we did is engage with them and gave them an alternative way of gaining that second authentication, or you can give them little devices that they can use. You're right, it's talking to them and understanding what the problem is.
Great. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Sorry we weren't able to get to everybody's question, but Sonia, I'll give it back to you for wrapping up.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, thank you very much for those questions. We have reached the end of the Q&A portion of the webinar. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at Open Clinica will follow up with you after this presentation. And if you have any further questions, please direct them to this email address that's on your screen, betterdata@openclinica.com. So thank you again, everyone, for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated, as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now, give me a few seconds. I'm going to send you a link in your chat box. You'll be able to view the recording of this event with that link, and also share this link with your colleagues once they register for the recording as well. And just like Ben mentioned, get even more out of today's presentation by downloading the supporting materials available under the Handouts tab, and we have there too for you. Okay, so now please join us in thanking our speakers, Ben, Mariam, Amanda, and Yama, for that very insightful presentation and for answering your questions. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at XTalks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, please take care and bye for now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ben, Yama, Amanda, Miriam. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye now.